In today's top news, a potentially major situation now as Cuba says it shot and killed 4 men aboard a U.S. registered speedboat.
Cuba says the boat was attempting to infiltrate its territory. Here's what we know so far.
Cuba says its forces shot and killed 4 people aboard a U.S. registered boat yesterday. Cuban officials saying the men were heavily armed and were attempting to infiltrate its territory. The country's interior ministry says the boat entered Cuban waters. Cuba says 6 of the passengers were injured and are in custody. It also says one of the passengers shot and injured the commander of a Cuban border guard vessel. The ministry described the passengers as Cuban residents of the U.S., adding 2 of the survivors were previously wanted for terrorism. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the U.S. Embassy in Havana is working to get access to other people who are aboard the vessel.
Suffice it to say, it is highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time. But we're going to find out. We're not going to base our conclusions on what they've told us.
Vice President J.D. Vance says the White House will continue to provide updates.
Certainly, a situation that we're monitoring. Hopefully, it's not as bad as we fear it could be, but can't say more because I just don't know more.
Florida's Attorney General says he's directed the Office of Statewide Prosecution to work with federal, state, and law enforcement to begin an investigation. The incident comes as tensions rise between the U.S. and its communist neighbor following the capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, a longtime ally of Cuba. Most oil deliveries to the island are now blocked, crippling the country's economy. Halfway across the world, another round of U.S.-Iran talks are set to begin today in Geneva. No big breakthroughs are expected, with Rubio saying Iran was attempting to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, while the talks will be focused around Tehran's nuclear program. Secretary Rubio commenting yesterday that Iran poses a grave threat to the U.S.
These things have to be addressed. The negotiations tomorrow and the talks tomorrow will be largely focused on the nuclear program. And we hope progress can be made, because that's the president's preference, to make progress on the diplomatic front. But it's also important to remember that Iran refuses to talk about the ballistic missiles.
Vice President Vance says the U.S. is seeking evidence that Iran is trying to rebuild a nuclear weapon after U.S.-led strikes destroyed the country's nuclear facilities last year.
So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem. As the president has said repeatedly, he wants to address that problem diplomatically, but of course the president has other options as well.
Iranian officials meanwhile say a fair, balanced deal could still be reached, but Iran will not give up its nuclear ambitions.
And we have accepted not to have nuclear weapons, but at the same time we have full rights to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
The negotiations come as the U.S. builds up its military capability in the region. Iran has threatened to strike U.S. bases if it is attacked. President Trump said 1 week ago that he was giving Tehran about 10 to 15 days to make a deal.